Buckle up. So Warren Dennis was born in Clarksdale, Mississippi in 1927. He pretty much always knew he wanted to be an artist. The story I heard growing up was that as of age like 5 or 6, he went to the beach to visit his grandmother and decided to set up a sign teaching art lessons and doing portraits on the beach of folks. So I actually, in going through his sketchbooks, one of the things I found from a sketchbook from 1978 was his own list of how long he'd been painting and in art. So ages 5 to 10 was art lessons, I guess, for him and teaching. And then at age 9 to 14, he got his first oil paints. So by 78, he'd been painting for 37 years, and then would go on to paint for another 43 years after that. So he graduated high school. He left Clarksdale. He first went to school at Mississippi Southern University. And then right after that, he got an opportunity to travel to Duluth, Minnesota to study with Yasui Kuniyoshi. So Kuniyoshi was, this is here, a preeminent 20th century modernist who his contemporaries were Hopper, George O'Keeffe, Stuart Davis. And Granddad would talk about Kuniyoshi a lot growing up. It was a really formative influence for him. I think you see the figurative work, but also these landscapes and still lifes. I see a lot of influences in that. Then he was able to enter the newly established graduate art program at the University of Mississippi at Oxford, where he studied and worked as an assistant with Jack Twerkoff. So Twerkoff is another artist. Before being at Ole Miss, he was actually at Black Mountain College, which is an interesting segue, and then went to Ole Miss and taught there. While he was there, he painted his famous Pink Mississippi. And again, just an influence that the name I heard a lot. It was clearly very influential for my grandfather, and I think you can see those influences. I tried to put a range of photos where you could see the connections there. In Granddad's early work, you can see that he's really experimenting with style. It's quite different, but the subject matter that he would go on to explore for most of his career is already there, right? We have women and children. We have a figure lying on newspapers, similar to the piece out there. We've got a horse. He was already interested in like rodeos and cowboys, sort of figures forgotten by society, and then, you know, the self-portrait from his school days. I feel like this still life, I mean, it's kind of your standard school still life that you would do, but it also has these connections to both Twerkoff's still lifes and Kuniyoshi's work. Some of his work in the early era was very gestural and a little bit darker than I think he would go on to paint. But again, you can see these kind of themes that would maintain, and you see him in these early years really trying to figure out who he was as an artist. Figures under trees, in the pasture, that would go on to be a theme as well. So he ended up working as a professor for the art department at Judson College from 1955 to 1965. And around that time, he met Mary Kate Lowry, who was my grandmother, obviously. And they would go on to have 4 children, my mom, Anna, my uncle, Cameron, Edwin, and then Martha. And my granddad was a family man. Like, he was so in love with my grandmother. I'm sure seeing him as a grandchild, their relationship was different than I'm sure it was when, like, my mom was young. But to me, their relationship was the one to emulate. They were madly in love. She ended up having dementia, and he took care of her for an extremely long time. And in countless and countless artworks throughout his career, you can see her as his muse. So again, he went on to teach in Marion, Alabama, works inspired. You see this painting, which was the one of him as a little boy on the horse. And again, his work when he's in Alabama starts to really kind of concentrate in on these themes. So I love this painting because, one, it's from 63, but it has a lot of the similar elements that he would go on to explore his whole career, but that are also in the park mural outside. So we've got a figure on a bike, there's a tricycle, the baby in the diaper. My grandmother reading is a common approach. She was an English teacher and studied literature, and so a lot of his paintings of her doing what she loved most, reading, a child painting or drawing. And then my granddad doing one of the many tasks of everyday life that kept him from his painting. So he wrote a lot about feeling kind of pulled in all directions. In one of his sketchbooks, there's a list of all the things he had to do, and it was like task man and like babysitter and also artist and framer and, you know, all of the things that artists and families do. So continuing on, he eventually was appointed as a professor at App State in 1965. And that's where he would stay for the majority of his career. That marked their move to Boone, obviously. And you start to see how the mountain landscapes were inspiring him pretty much right away. These are 68. These are a little later, but this is actually a painting from his studio window at App State. So this was the view he had. He talked to me about this painting, and we both thought it was particularly successful because of how he sort of renders the icy edges of the window frame there. So something he was always interested in, like the pictorial plane and framing the image. So he, in his role at App State, he also was one of the original developers of the Appalachian New York Loft program, and was the campus director at the New York Loft for a number of years. So he went for 3 separate semesters in 85, 89, and 93, and then again in summer of 82. So when going through his sketchbooks and his work, not only his photos, but you could tell that these were like inspiring, influential times for him to be in New York. He would mark it in his sketchbooks. He would make notes of where he was in New York, and generally just travel and seeing art in person and being in a place where he would be inspired was something that he felt was really important for students, for himself, and ultimately for his children and grandchildren. He also was awarded the first scholarly leave granted by the Department of Art for an Art in Europe course. So it ended up being actually only in 85 and 87. He was clearly daydreaming about 86. And I guess he had to push it off to 87. But again, he created their study abroad for arts program so that students could go to Europe, places like Florence, Rome, Venice, Paris, and Amsterdam. So again, travel was super important to him and Mary Kate. They would often find reasons to travel together for these things. And I think they just understood how much it helped with this sort of development of your passions and your interests and just seeing more and more. And again, that went to students themselves and ultimately to the grandkids. I think they took me to New York in 3rd grade, and then DC in 7th grade, and then back to New York in 8th grade. And then when I graduated high school, I got to go to Europe. And I mentioned this not to talk about myself, but one, to point out his funny little head here, and me just chilling, and them like, we got to get down to business and see some art. They were hustling, leaving me in the dust. But it was also just an incredibly pivotal time for me. It was the moment that cemented, oh, my interest in art is not just casual. I like to go to museums and experience them. It was, I can't stop thinking about this painting and the artist that made it. And it's something that really lights me up and that I want to dedicate my life to. And I think that was the sort of thing that he understood to be true about travel. So he kept taking us places. So ultimately, he taught at App State till 1991, and then he retired and went into painting full-time as well as being a grandfather full-time. They lived in Boone until 2014 when they moved to Winston-Salem to be closer to family. That was when my grandmother had more serious dementia at that phase, and so it was important for them to get out of the mountains. This is his studio in Winston-Salem right after he passed away. So this was its like working state for him. And so he painted until he was 91, right before he passed away. He was, first my grandmother was in the home, and then he eventually had to move into the home, but my uncle would pick him up pretty much every day and bring him to the house to paint. And we have sketchbooks up until the very end as well. So once he passed away in 2021, our family created the Warren Dennis Legacy with the goal of continuing to share his work with the community and a wider audience. Our first sort of business at hand was documenting all the pieces, photographing them, labeling them, getting them into an online database. Currently, our database has 1,089 artworks in it. That includes 250 paintings on canvas, 150 paintings on paper, and that 1,000 is just a small percentage of the tens of thousands of sketches and drawings and works on paper that we have to go through. So that's pretty much the biography at a glance. I would like to spend most of the time actually talking about his work, his influences, the themes he explored, and also tying it back into the exhibit that's out there. So I always kind of generally understood his work, right? Growing up with it, I understood that there was always this push and pull of humor and being able to document kind of the weird, real eccentricities of normal people, right? So card players, people on bikes, circus scenes that got a little weird. A lot of the places that he loved and was inspired by, his passions, that was all there. And really, he thought of his work as painterly images from American life, family life, things that were obvious, again, rendered with sense of humor and personality. And I spent enough time with him talking about art history and the masters that he was inspired by to know that composition was a huge thing for him, right? Rule of thirds, lines of sight, these compositions, 3 people, directing your eyes, movement. These were things he was thinking a lot about when he was putting his artworks together. So I understood all of that generally. But it wasn't until he passed away and I resaw the park and we went through the sketchbooks and really dove into his collection that I started to understand just how much he methodically worked out each composition and painting, right? And then that became the impetus for this show. And the park, again, was this sort of coming together moment of remembering what a big piece this was for him, realizing how it ended up serving as a way for him to kind of finalize or celebrate these themes that he would explore in different compositions and ranges for his whole life. And then, again, with the sketchbook, seeing how much he worked and reworked images. Also, obviously, viewing his collection as a whole, it was easy to pull out the themes that he really kind of touched on throughout. So we'll go through those pretty quickly. Again, I think most of it is around this idea of simple moments of daily life. So a lot of it is, like I said, the things that brought him joy or the things he put into his paintings for the most part. He was obsessed with classical music. He would listen to it really loud all the time. He had a very fancy, he was pretty minimal for most things, but he had a very important to him sound system with really big speakers that were in both his studio and the living room, so he could kind of blast the whole house. His favorite was Toscanini. So again, he paints what he's passionate about. William Faulkner, Picasso, these things come into his work quite a bit, but also really the themes come to family, couples, nature and leisure, art history, music, literary, and circus. So that's what we'll talk about. Family, obviously, from the onset was a big one. I think these are early paintings, so he's still kind of working through his style, but I included them because, again, we've got a baby in a diaper with a tricycle, which would come back later into the park mural. And the family loves this painting. We don't think we'll ever sell it because it's this haunting, lifeless mother with her babies. Her eyes are so scary. But he was really, really inspired by Modigliani. So it's also okay. But also the effect is a little bit, we're never selling this. This is not going anywhere. And all family was brought in. So we have baby Martha, we have child, me, and Melon. I was a pretty sullen kid, and I did really like cantaloupe. And my cousin. A lot of these would be from pictures that were floating around, so I can very clearly picture not only the painting, but the photograph that my aunt took of my uncle walking my nephew, or my cousin. And then this was also a family postcard. It was like a Christmas announcement of a family member who'd adopted a child. So again, a lot of the pictures would get sort of morphed in my mind with the original inspiration images. Similar to this one of my grandmother, we knew of this photograph, and then we found this after he passed away. So that's been another kind of wonderful way to receive new gifts from him even after he's gone. And then couples. So, talking to him, he spoke a lot about couples sort of becoming his real focus. I do think overall a lot of his works are about couples. But it wasn't just like, ooh, people in love. It was like there's always some sort of tension or lack of connection between the couples. So even here, I can't really explain it. There's this sort of coldness or the kind of sullen. They're embraced, but they're not really looking at each other. This is apparently my great aunt and uncle during a rough patch. When it does quite look like them. And again, most of the couples, you have these sort of portraits side by side, shoulder to shoulder, touching, connecting in some way, but then emotionally very disconnected. And as he went on in his career, he kept the idea of couples and continued to play around with how they could connect and disconnect. So we've got the woman looking right at us, the man looking somewhere, the figures kind of in different directions for their lines of sight. Again, playing with this tension between engaged, not engaged. Nature and leisure, the park, obviously a big one. Tried to include a lot of those in the exhibit. And again, showing how he just kind of would like take ideas, work them, women with strollers, people running, again, themes that just come up over and over again. Lots of picnics on mountainsides, but I thought this was super interesting to see not only how he documented his work and labeled them first stage, second stage, but also, again, the thought process that's going into the compositions, his kind of standard figure looming, and then he's like, actually, I think all of this is better without this figure. Again, we've got baseball players, beekeepers, and I think this starts to show how very early in his career, he was really exploring abstraction, and then he sort of went away from it for sort of like, regionalist-esque realism. And then later in his career, he starts going back to abstraction. And I don't know if I got a lot of good pictures of it, but a lot of it would be reworking previous compositions that he'd done. So he would do a piece early on in his career, and then as he was reworking pieces, he'd say, let me take that same composition and boil it down. Now, obviously, this is not his own composition. This is from Velázquez, but it shows his interest in art history, not just Velázquez, but also Picasso did a lot of Velázquez variations, and ultimately, Picasso was his number one. I inherited his collection of art history books, and the number of Picasso ones is honestly slightly ridiculous. It's like an entire bookcase of Picasso books. I do think at some point people were like, he likes Picasso, we'll get him a book. But he has a lot. But really, I mean, he loved all art history, Western art history in particular. He ended up painting his favorites. So Monet, there's a ton of variations of these. I actually found the original source photograph, which is more in this color, but the final large painting is all in yellow and hung in their house for a really long time. Hopper, Rembrandt, Renoir, Matisse, his favorites, right? And those were the artists that he was introducing me to, so imagine that. I studied modern art. I include the nudes. It's a little bit weird to talk about as my granddad, but I think I will say I appreciate that there's more going on to them than just like naked ladies. Like there's this really interesting, a lot of times the clothed men are in the work in relation to the nude. So there's a lot of artist and model pictures. Obviously in his sketchbooks, there's tons of figure drawings. And so I think he was aware of the slightly strange dynamic that would occur between a like professor and a student, and like the just sort of vulnerability that came up. And then again, often there's this lack of connection, right? There's like the man clothes, like with his back to the lady. Even his Adam and Eve, the Adam is clothed and Eve is in the nude. So again, there's a lot of them. So it was part of what he was interested in for sure. Music was a big one, obviously the connection to classical music, but really all music. We've got jazz, got classical. There were a lot of works of more sort of like bluegrassy kind of figures. And again, that was through his whole life, and then took that to abstraction as he got older. And this painting is in the show, and this painting has since sold. But I wanted to be able, the nice thing about this presentation is I can show you guys some of the pieces that I was like, oh, I wish we could include this in the show, but they're gone. So I think together across the years, it's just, I love seeing and making the connection of how he's like really boiling these compositions down to their essential elements. The family in general, very into books. Mark Twain, Thomas Wolfe, these were figures that he painted quite a bit, read a lot, spoke about a lot, told a lot of stories about. There was also mythology. He did a lot of this Icarus series across many decades. So the first sort of like businessman Icarus, and then Daedalus looking for Icarus, and then abstract Icarus. I just think these are lovely. And the sketchbooks have a lot of falling Icaruses, and if you don't know what they are, it's like, what is that? Why are there pages and pages of these all different angles? But again, that was another one of the works where I had that light bulb moment of realizing how many times he was like really wrestling with getting these images just how he wanted them. Some biblical works, again, that sort of relates to art history. It all sort of ties together. Theatrical, Ophelia, Falstaff, La Bohème, all of the sort of literary, it was what was on his mind and what he was passionate about, and so they showed up in his work. And finally, the circus was, again, there throughout most of his career, through different decades. And I've often wondered, it always seemed a little out of place to me with all of the rest of the things that he was doing. And I never asked him, so I don't know, I'm just assuming, but I always got the impression that the circus to him really represented that sort of weird human kind of two sides of the same coin of like, the circus is fun and for children and it's vibrant and it's funny and it's silly. And there's the weird dark side with like sideshow acts and when the circus leaves town or you see behind the bright lights, there is this sort of weird tension. And so to me, that was always sort of where it was. And you can see that in some of the paintings. This one is very bright and colorful and seemingly pretty, yay, circus. And then this one, after the circus is over, the homeless man kind of, he did a lot of like sleeping figures like that. But there are also a lot of clowns, also ones we will never sell. Again, it's not, I like want to include it because it's very much a like solid subset of his practice, and hasn't gotten seen nearly as much for somewhat obvious reasons, but he was often playing with this sort of under the radar dark humor, or at least acknowledgement of the kind of stranger parts of life. The circus acts, these very jovial. There's also a man hanging upside down that's a little bit. So the circus act paintings also range from being very fun, very playful to, oh, that one's a little kind of dark. So then we talk about process, again, a big part of this show. Again, another part of going through all of his sketchbooks and writings is finding, it's like he's talking to us and explaining things in a way that really, I think, clarifies. It's not my voice. I'm not saying he wanted to paint it this way. He's telling us. So in 95, again, after he's retired, he's saying, I'm pushing as hard as ever. I have on my painting the things or effects that I want is the richness of Rubens, the toughness of Picasso, the simplicity and tonal depth of Rembrandt, though not as dark, poetry and strength. And then I think this paragraph is interesting. We had some students come in on a field trip, and I was talking about how there is, even in the works out there, this sort of push and pull between very gestural, painterly works and then very hard line figures. And he talks about that in this. He doesn't want to overwork things. He's still vacillating between the fuzzy tonal painting and the hard line, bright colored, little shaded work. I like to paint both ways. There is a resolution in the future for me of these two approaches, I think. Maybe it's not important. Making good works is in which the method that suits. The idea is the most important thing. So again, I don't think I need to go into this too much because a lot of the process stuff is out there for you to see. Hopefully you've seen it. But I think this is a really good example kind of in order of how a painting evolves. So we've got this really rough first idea, 2 figures, columns, something going on in the background. And then he's like, okay, that's an interesting composition. And then he kind of fills it out a little more. He tries a slightly different angle. He plays with the male figure. He's telling us something about the color and the darkness, or telling himself something about those things. And then he sort of tightens it, right? So you get the lines are much more, the lines and the shading start to show an image. We've got the moon, we've got the reflection, we've got more details of the figures. We've got an actual, here's a woman. And we're doing it again with even more details. And then we're doing just the woman. We're trying her out in different poses and different faces and different profiles. And then we're trying it again. And then again, just the woman. And then in color of just the woman. I assume that there was also one of the man and then the finished painting. So again, seeing those to me, that was something that I had no idea he was doing until after the fact. And of course it makes sense, but I just didn't, I don't think I recognized, because it's also in the sketchbooks so organized, right? Like there'll be a section of, and often it would be a sort of series. So like one of the pages would be like the park series, and it would list all the paintings in that series that he was working on. And then mostly they would be grouped, but often there would be like, you know, they would kind of jump around. So he's like working with all these different ideas kind of at the same time. And then he was also methodical about, like, they would start in the sketchbooks. Then he would do these like colored pencil or pastel versions that he could sell. And then maybe he would do multiple of those, and then it would move to the painting. So it starts a little looser, but by the probably 70s, that's pretty consistent in each of the sketchbooks. You can see what he was working on, you can see all the paintings, and you can see all the different ways he's exploring the different compositions. As I mentioned earlier, most of his paintings are very bright, but I start to end with this because I think another part of the sort of lessons he gave to me that I carry on are that art becomes a way of processing the parts of life that are very difficult, that you don't have words for. His brother was killed in a crash with a milk truck in the 60s, and here in the 90s, we have him kind of working through these images. So I think it took him a long time to get to this point. They're very dark, but they're very poignant, and they're beautifully composed, and the color is glorious. And so I think it shows this way of working through things and making beauty from the hardest parts of life. This was his only political statement about the Vietnam War. I'll leave it at that. And this was the last painting that he ever did. I really didn't think I was going to get emotional, but now I am. So it's funny because in 1989, he has this quote in his sketchbook: "If a picture gets too complicated, the point is lost. You must always ask yourself, what is this picture about? Is it about chairs or people? If it's about people, play down the chair." Yet, at the end of his life, he's got his little note, maybe this will help. So, he's wrestling with what's going on with the distance between my grandmother and him. My grandmother was in a wheelchair. And we've got this one image of the couple eating with this division between. And very quickly, it turns into the chairs. And the chairs are just such a powerful symbol for where they were at the end of their life. So yeah, I think that's enough said on that. So moving on to general reflections. He has this quote, it's very long, but it's talking about his own perceived flaws, which are, to him, the inability to truly concentrate or a lack of self-confidence, which is the same thing. You don't allow yourself to concentrate, therefore presupposing failure. Then he talks about like the great artist that he's trying to be. Those gain power and efficiency by being able to really focus on an object or on what they're doing so that the rest of the world just falls away. And that's what, that habit is what is the practice that lets you get to good ideas quickly. And he says he doesn't have that, and he wishes it was his only fault. His other faults he drags around with him, chains forged in life, but some he was born with. But then he goes on to say, but every time I do something that truly pleases me, I feel a sense of triumph over myself and over my flaws. I can shake my fist at my flaws, especially if they want me to drag me down and away from art. And I know then that I've won again, that my best self is in control, on display, proof is on the wall. And I just, it's so funny to me because he writes a lot in addition to this about how he's just not productive enough and he can't make enough art and he's so unfocused. And I'm like, I'm glad he wasn't more focused. Like, we have so many paintings. And these are things that I struggle with so deeply. So it's such a nice reminder to me that we are our own worst enemy, and that over a lifetime, things that feel sporadic and like not enough can become something really big and whole and more than, you can even kind of wrangle. And then lastly, this quote, which again, he's talking about how he's not really good enough. My arsenal, whatever develops, is not suave. 95, he's like been teaching, he's retired. He's like, I don't have any real technique. I never really learned how to paint. But I love this part. I fought some heroic battles with pictures. It's like wrestling a lion or hooking onto a whale. Some of these battles I have lost, but I know why I lost them. Most of the time it was because my intent flagged or the idea was poor. Sometimes the idea was good, but it was beyond me at the time. And these sometimes settle into the unconscious and fester there until they are revived and given another brave try. But there are never any guarantees. And again, one, he did paint a lot of whales just eating men. But he also, this really sums up what I was trying to get at in the show of like, there are ideas that he worked on throughout his career, and you could tell he was working towards some version in his head that would be good enough or that would be worthy of the topic at hand. And the Lion Tamer, first of all, the Lion Tamer painting is huge, and it's one of my favorites. I wanted to include it in the show, but it's unframed and has a big scratch on it. But it's one of the things he's drawing in his earliest sketchbooks. So from 1969, we've got these different sketches, lithographs, the big painting. And then the rest of the circus act paintings are from like the 90s and the 80s. And so again, he's working, there's lions all throughout the sketchbooks randomly. They'll just pop up. And then again, in the latest sketchbooks, they come back. These are like at the last sketchbook with the chairs. And there's this one of the lion attacking back and eating this man. And I just feel like we would laugh so much over that. He would show it to me and we would be like, the lion finally fought back. Like the lion got it. And I just feel like that sums up his kind of playful approach and dedicated approach really well. So in closing up, before I can do some questions, we as part of the family also have set up the Warren and Mary Kay Dennis Endowed Memorial Scholarship for Art at App State. We are hoping the goal of it will give money to art students in the department to help them pay for their college. So if you feel like supporting students, which was his ultimate goal and my grandmother's ultimate goal, you can use that QR code and donate, and we may or may not be sending little thank you gifts of sketches from sketchbooks to people who donate. So you don't have to donate a specific amount. Any amount will get you a little thank you gift, which we're not supposed to actually tell people, but now you know. So Q&A, but before I open it up to others, I wanted to start with a question that I get over and over and over again, to the point that he and I would joke about it. He would be like, they always ask me why they got such tiny heads, and we would all laugh. And as I was making this presentation, I was working at the front desk, and someone, I swear to you, walked out and was like, that Warren Dennis guy really liked to paint tiny heads, didn't he? And I was like, I cannot believe that is happening. So I thought I would just get past it at the beginning. There is a term, an art history term, attenuated forms, which means long and skinny. And El Greco is one of the ones known for it, but also Modigliani. I think Picasso, in his blue period, got a little weird proportions, I would say. Hopper, the light is long, the figures are not so much. Kuniyoshi is playing with proportions, so the feet are very tiny, but the upper body's quite big. Giacometti, Sheila, Thomas Hart Benton, the artists that he was interested in and surrounding himself with were setting a standard for manipulating the human form in order to evoke something. And so I think that is the answer, is that it just became his style, because he felt like, one, I think it reflected to him the way he, I think some of it is just artists have a style and it looks right to them and they make it that way. But it's also part of this canon of art history where like figures are, why do you want to paint a perfectly realistic person? They're right in front of you, right? It's much more interesting to see these sort of odd figures. And maybe through making these odd figures, you can express something about their personality and the oddness of them as humans. So, okay, that was not too long. Yeah. Any other questions? Any thoughts? Anything?
Well, you answered my question.
Yeah, I knew. Yes. It's the one.
I had to text my mom about this, but the whale, what does the whale represent?
So he talked about like the whale. I mean, I think Jonah and the whale, the story, there's this sort of, it's a kind of like art history, kind of like biblical, it's just this canon kind of imagery that I think stands for man's feeble attempts against nature, which I think was something he was quite interested in. And then he wrote specifically about this idea of like, I think in some ways, a lot of these like man versus something giant was symbolic to him of his own attempts at doing something big in life, or tackling a painting that he felt like was very ambitious. And just, I think also he finds it a little humorous. I mean, they're dark, like the man in the mouth is dark, but I think to him it's like silly humans.
Did you ever come to any of your art history classes?
He did not. He hosted a few for me, but no, he didn't. When I was writing my thesis, we did collaborate. Like I sent him what I was writing. He sent me thoughts back. So he helped in that way, but he didn't actually show up to any, which was probably good at the time. Yeah.
Am I correct that he has a history with exhibiting and TAG?
He does.
We showed together like a long time ago.
Yes, and that is part of the kind of story. That's how I think partially the mural ended up here. So to fully give that story, Jeff knew my grandparents. I believe they had collected his work for some time. He showed it TAG twice. I think one was like 2013, but there was a time before that as well, I think. And when my granddad passed away, the mural was at in Morganton at a community center there where it had been commissioned. And after he passed away, they reached out to the family and they were like, we're closing, we're gonna have to give you this mural back. And we were like, we really cannot take this mural. Like, we do not have any place for this mural. And my Aunt Terry is in Winston-Salem, and she was like, Jeff is opening this really cool new art space. I wonder if they would have any place for it. And we were like, cool, tell me more about it. What's going on? So then that all worked out perfectly. I mean, that in itself is such a wild, perfect coincidence. Like the piece was originally meant to be like all flat, right? And here it has to turn the corner, which I honestly think is way nicer because you like walk into the piece and it fits perfectly on that wall. I mean, like any bit in either direction, it would not have fit. And even when we went to the dedication of the piece, my uncle had found some of Granddad's writings on the original commission, and he talks about how like he loves that it's in this community space where kids and families can see it. It's like right across from these glass windows so people can see it from the outside when they come in, and we were all like goosebumps of like it has found this home where it can continue to do exactly what he wanted it to do. And so then again, the first time I came to TAG was for that dedication. And I remember I was like very fed up at my last job, and I was telling my aunt, like, gosh, this is just really the work that I want to be doing, and such a cool space. And then I left my job, and then months later, this job was posted. So it's that's how we have all come to be here at TAG. We're a joint. Yeah, well, thank you. I feel very grateful. Yes.
So you showed and talked about some of the artists that he studied under when he was in his like college days.
Mm-hmm.
Have y'all had the opportunity to talk with any of his students who studied under him or see any of their work?
So it comes up occasionally. When we had his memorial, we did a memorial exhibit where each of the members of the family picked an artwork, or not every member, but ones that were interested picked an artwork that they felt a special connection to, and then wrote a little paragraph, and that was displayed at App State. And so when we had that event, there were quite a few people that came through that were like, he taught, the legacy there. So that was really wonderful. And then there are people that just like maintained connections with him for a long time. One of them, his name is failing me. He does the Artemats. They were very close for a long time, and now his name was like there and gone. So there are definitely, we get those stories. Even the other day, we were sitting in here having a staff meeting, and someone came in and they were like, he taught me art in App State. So it happens, and it's exciting. It's nice. Yes?
Did he only teach video art, or did he also teach art?
He also taught art history. Yep. Yeah, definitely his second passion. Anything else?
He was just the most gentle, sweet, interesting person, so humble, and so interesting, and so gentle.
Yeah, he was meant to be a granddad. I mean, he was, it was his favorite thing. Like just Christmases, I mean, they would always be at their house, all the stuff. I mean, just a proponent of having a tradition and sticking to it and showing up for family and promoting arts. I mean, the whole family. So my mom studied theater, did set design and lighting design. My uncle is a photographer. His wife is an artist. My other uncle is a filmmaker. My aunt worked in galleries but then did marketing. The grandkids, I studied art history. My cousin is an artist. My other cousin does art. I mean, I am so grateful to have been brought up in a family that was like, no, you can dedicate your life to something like art and make a life of it, and it is a worthy pursuit, because I know not everybody has that luxury. So very grateful to him for that. Thank you guys so much. I hope that this was interesting.